Hello and welcome to People's News. This is your weekly roundup, a look back at the key stories we've covered from Monday through Friday, what's changed since they first broke, and what's still unfolding. This week's reporting spans conflict, diplomacy, climate, and global security, with several stories still very much in motion. We began the week in Ukraine, where renewed strikes on energy infrastructure continued to disrupt power supplies during freezing conditions. Since that report, there have been no confirmed ceasefire agreements, despite renewed diplomatic language from multiple sides. Western governments have reiterated support for Ukraine's energy grid, while Ukrainian officials say repairs are ongoing but remain vulnerable. There has been no verified reduction in hostilities, and attacks on infrastructure continue to be a central feature of the conflict. What to watch next is whether diplomatic signals translate into measurable changes on the ground, particularly around civilian and energy targets. We also reported on multiple explosions inside Iran, alongside growing rhetoric around internal security and external threats. Since then, Iranian authorities have not released independent forensic findings, and responsibility for the incidents remains disputed. Official statements continue to frame the explosions as security-related, while analysts urge caution against early conclusions. At the same time, tensions between Iran and Western governments remain elevated, with diplomatic channels still open but strained. The key question is whether further evidence emerges, or whether this remains a politically contested narrative. Another major story this week focused on the European Union's stance on designated extremist organizations and the diplomatic response from Iran. There have been no formal changes to EU listings, but political language on both sides has hardened. European officials have reaffirmed their legal frameworks, while Iranian leaders have criticized what they describe as selective enforcement. This remains a legal and political standoff, rather than a change in operational policy. What to watch is whether this dispute escalates into sanctions, legal action, or reciprocal measures. In Japan, record snowfall caused widespread travel disruption and safety warnings across several regions. Since the initial reports, snowfall has eased in some areas, but authorities continue to warn of secondary risks, including avalanches, icy roads, and delayed infrastructure repairs. There have been no major casualty spikes reported, but cleanup efforts are ongoing. Attention now turns to how quickly transport and supply chains can return to normal, particularly in rural regions. We also covered scientific findings from Antarctica, where researchers have analyzed some of the oldest ice ever recovered, offering new insight into Earth's climate history. There have been no revisions to the findings, but scientists continue to emphasize the importance of this data in refining long-term climate models, particularly around greenhouse gas cycles and historical temperature shifts. This is a long-term science story, rather than an immediate policy development. Finally this week, we covered several diplomatic developments involving major powers, all marked by dialogue, statements, and positioning, but a lack of binding outcomes. One focus was talks between the United States and India, which were publicly framed as steps toward closer cooperation on trade, technology, and strategic alignment. Officials on both sides highlighted shared interests, particularly around supply chains and defense cooperation. Since those reports, there have been no formal agreements signed and no detailed implementation plans announced. Instead, both governments issued positive statements emphasizing continued dialogue and future cooperation. We also reported on renewed peace-related signaling around the war in Ukraine, including diplomatic language suggesting openness to talks. However, since those reports, there has been no confirmed ceasefire, no agreed negotiating framework, and no verified reduction in hostilities. Military activity has continued, and official statements from all sides remain cautious, indicating that any talks, if they occur, are still at an exploratory stage. At the same time, a major arms control framework between the United States and Russia formally expired. The New START Treaty, which for over a decade limited deployed strategic nuclear weapons and included verification measures, has now lapsed without a replacement or formal extension. Since its expiration, both Washington and Moscow have said they intend to act responsibly, but there is no new treaty, no stopgap agreement, and no agreed inspection regime in place. Russia has stated it no longer considers itself bound by the treaty's limits, while also signaling openness to future dialogue under different conditions. Taken together, these developments reflect a broader diplomatic pattern. Talks continue, statements are issued, and channels remain open, but binding commitments are absent. Diplomacy in this context serves to manage risk, signal intent, and prevent escalation. But without signed agreements, timelines, or enforcement mechanisms, these efforts remain political positioning rather than policy change. What to watch next is whether dialogue produces concrete outcomes, such as ceasefire frameworks, formal negotiations, or new arms control arrangements, or whether these talks remain without signatures. That's the week rounded up. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe to stay up to date.